You see, because, we want to say something new and interesting. We want to say something that is life transforming, something that is provocative, that to awaken you as a congregation to new ways of thinking about your relationship with Jesus, new ways of referring to God and the way in which God has transformed each of us. But we know that Easter is incomprehensible. Easter is miraculous. How do you explain a miracle to someone? How do you extend or try to find objective proof of something that is unprovable? And yet, the resurrection is at the heart of our faith. That is why you are here today. The resurrection was the beginning of something profound, the beginning of the Jesus movement, a movement that changed the course of human history, a movement that has been unlike anything else that has occurred in human history. So how do you try to make sense of that? Particularly when this illogical event, we try to grasp it logically, but it is something that is necessary, and I think it is something we need to understand more clearly now than at any other time, given what is going on in our world. How can we awaken ourselves to Easter in a time that needs to hear the good news? Particularly when we see leaders of our world willfully imprisoning innocent people and refugees, where sovereign nations like Ukraine are being invaded by war criminals like Putin, where climate deniers are continuing to deny the fact that our planet is dying, where we see leaders who believe themselves to be infallible despite in spite of the power that they have and the clear limitations that they should be answering to. It's a challenge, to say the least. But this is the day that God has made, and let us rejoice and be glad in it. This is the day that God has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it, says the psalmist today. That is my affirmation. Let us rejoice that God has made this day, this miraculous day. I am alive. I am grateful. I am open to the unimaginable possibilities that await us and me. I am woke. You know that word, anybody? Okay, here's a survey. How many of you know what that word means? Who wants to explain it? I am woke to the possibilities. I am aware. I'm a receptacle to the possibilities that await me and us. I am woke to the wonder and love that God is providing and giving us as gift. I am aware of the power structures that exist. And there are many of these things that I cannot control. But I can receive and transform these things to bring healing and wholeness and beauty to a world that so desperately needs it. This affirmation gets me through the difficult times, the trying times. This affirmation from 118 is at the heart of this Easter proclamation. God has made this new day, this wonderful life-giving day, and rejoicing is the only appropriate response we have. This is the day that God has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. But sometimes it isn't that simple, is it? Sometimes we kid ourselves that life is not everything it's cracked up to be. We are challenged. It's not a bed of roses. There may be days, there may be weeks, There may be months where you experience what may be a desolate place, a wilderness, a Good Friday, where God is distant and far away, where we cannot grasp the essence of the love and the grace and the miraculous event of the resurrection. We feel alone. We feel abandoned. We sometimes think, will this dark tunnel ever end? But remember, we are fallible. We are people of clay feet. We are fragile. We are vulnerable. We are human. And we are no different than those disciples and those women. I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine? So here is this person you cherish and love, and many of us have had the vacuous grief, feeling of loss when someone we care for and love dies. And these women wanted to do as they did in that culture. They wanted to go to the tomb, and they wanted to anoint the body and bless the body of Jesus. And they arrive, and lo and behold, they were, quote, perplexed. Well, that's a pretty good word. They were pretty perplexed. I would be pretty perplexed that suddenly my friend's body was no longer where it was supposed to be. And lo and behold, the two men dressed in white appeared to them, and they went from being perplexed to being terrified, flattened, so much so that they bowed their heads, they covered their faces. And they said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? Why do you look for the living among the dead?" They heard what these angels said. They went back and they told the disciples. And then Peter himself pondered these things, and he too was wondering and perplexed about what had happened. Now these three women, Mary Magdalene, the one who purportedly was the one who was going to be stoned as an adulteress, and Jesus stopped the Pharisees from doing so. Let those who are without sin cast the first stone. Joanna, the mother of the wife of Chupas, she was the woman in the early part of the gospel that had been cured of an evil spirit and transformed and healed of her infirmities. Her life was not a bed of roses. Mary, mother of James and John. Remember them, James and John? The self-centered, egotistical disciples who were arguing about who was going to sit on the right, who was going to sit on the left, who was going to have the position of power. That's all they cared about. And Peter himself, the ill-tempered, fiery, unpredictable Peter, the one who said to Jesus, "I will not allow them to do this to you." And Jesus said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." Because Jesus knew what Peter was going to say and do. And not too long afterwards, "Peter, do you know him?" "No, I do not know him." "Peter, do you know him?" "No, I don't know him." "Peter, do you know him?" "No, I do not know him." And the cock crowed. Who denied him his friend out of fear and cowardice, fear for his own safety. The disciples that had spent all that time with him were nowhere to be found when he was at his greatest need in the garden. And it was the women who came to the tomb. They were of fragile human beings. They were vulnerable. They were weak. They were of clay feet. They were no different than you and I. And yet, their lives were transformed. We know little of what happened to the women following. We know what Peter did, and it wasn't until Jesus' ascension into heaven that they were changed and they understood clearly what it was the message that Jesus had brought was about. It was about unconditional grace and love. The kind of love that cannot be explained. The kind of love that transcends our ability to articulate. I've had the privilege over my career of being with dozens, if not hundreds, of young couples who want to be married. The phone call generally goes like this. Hello, can I speak to the priest, please? Yes, speaking. My wife and I would like to be married. Can we get married next week? No, not quite. Let's give it a month or two. So I invite them into my office and we sit down and we start to chat and get to know one another. And I try to explain and say a little bit about what it is we do in church and why it is considered a sacrament. And every time I meet with a couple, I will say this, ask them this question. I will say, I want you to tell me in words how much you love your partner. And generally their eyes go big and round, their mouths drop open. And in all my years of ministry, I have never had anyone say to me, I can say exactly how it feels to be in love with my partner. And I say, that's because God doesn't care if you can articulate how much you love. What God cares about is that you experience the unconditional, undescribable gift of love that is of God in the person of Jesus. And for those of us that are lucky enough to be parents, it is that times 10. I distinctly remember 32 years ago holding my first son, Christopher, in my arms. Tears like this, rolling down my cheek. And being absolutely floored and flabbergasted by the love I felt for that innocent little baby. I could not even come close to articulating what it felt like. It felt like an entire part of my being that I didn't even know was missing was being filled up. See, God didn't care that I could explain it. All that God cared about is I experienced it and lived it. The closest I could come to explaining and expressing how much I loved that child was that I would die for that child. And that didn't feel adequate. And that is what God has done for us. That God has given his only Son, that we may love each other and love God with our heart, soul, body, mind, and strength, and go into the world with that transformative love to share it, to give it, and to be advocates for a new humanity. In the second reading from Brian McLaren, the outcome of living this resurrection is practicing kindness, nonviolence, reconciliation, reverence, joy, hope, neighborliness, and peace, and unconditional love. This is the day that God has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it, going into the world, transforming those we care for and those we encounter, in the sure and certain hope that Jesus' resurrection is in each of us, and we are called to carry it forward. Thank you. Be to God. Amen.